When we allow ourselves to get offended, we actually miss out on the opportunity to learn from people with different views and ideas than us. So while our culture is teaching us how not to be offensive, is it possible that we're actually forgetting how not to be offended? That's what we're going to explore during today's Reboot Recovery Show. Let's go.
The Reboot Recovery Show helps listeners overcome trauma and mental health challenges. Thousands have already experienced healing by applying what they learned on the show. And now, it's your turn.
Welcome to the Reboot Recovery Show. I'm Evan Owens. I'm here with Lori. We are going to get into some awesome stuff today. We're so happy that you have joined us. You know, Reboot Recovery Show, it's all about helping one another overcome trauma together so we can embrace a brighter future. We're here in our wonderful little studio in Nashville, Tennessee, talking about something that I found really interesting. This author, Irshad Manji, author of her book is called Don't Label Me, An Incredible Conversation for Divided Times. She thinks that it's about time we stop getting offended. You know, I was reading this article and I just sat back and I said to my friend who was with me, I said, this is what I've been trying to put into words that I haven't been able to say near as articulately as she have. Her thoughts just blew me away. You know, she frames her discussion through a lens that I really hadn't seen before. She posits this. She says that if we're teaching our society, she actually specifically talks about kids, but I'll frame it for all of us, that if we're teaching our society how not to be offensive, that it's necessary then that we also learn how not to be offended. How not to be offended. Now, I don't know about you, Lori, but in my life, I've met a few people who are easily offended. Obviously not you or me or any of our listeners, right. But they know somebody who is easily offended. And here's my experience with people who are easily offended is that usually before not long, they end up alone. They end up all alone because what happens is they start to push other people away and they end up sort of locked in this cage of all of their offendedness. And as people who have endured trauma, for our listeners who are in that category, let's be honest, there's some people who are going to say some downright offensive, maybe even say stupid things to us at times. And when that happens, we get a choice, right? We get to choose, are we going to be offended? And how we respond to that might change the speed at which we are able to heal. So if you would like to see your healing speed up and happen faster, then this is the episode. You need to stick around and hear the full thing today, and you've come to the right spot. But we're going to leave a little cliffhanger, a little reality TV cliffhanger there. We don't have a commercial. I wish we did. They'd probably pay for our podcast, but we don't yet. But we're going to answer some of your questions. If you've never submitted a question, this is your week. Go to Twitter or Facebook, ask any question. No question too long or short or smart or dumb is wrong. Submit it. You can send us to show@rebootrecovery.com or find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, The Gram. Is that what they call it, the kids these days?
The kids these days are calling it that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think they're even on the gram anymore. I'm not really sure what's happening.
No,
so Lori's going to screen the questions, and if she doesn't like your question, she won't ask me.
Nope.
I'm just teasing. Let's get into it. What's the first one today?
All right. One of our listeners says, I spent an entire career as an EMS. Now that I'm no longer working in that field, I feel like I've lost my tribe. I'm active in my church, but even there, I don't quite fit in to the typical mold. I feel like I'm still waiting on a new calling or group of people where I belong. I believe it will come, but what should I do while I wait?
Wow, what a great question. And I personally know so many people who would identify, even people who haven't been EMSs. We talk about people who have recently retired, for example. A lot of times there's this weird feeling of, not really belonging anymore, not knowing what to do with their time. But in your role, I could see how it could even be more intense or more that way. Have you ever considered that maybe something is happening while nothing is happening? That maybe something is happening while nothing is happening. One of the greatest I guess I could think, what are some of the greatest figures in all of the Bible, whether that's Abraham or David or Moses or Joseph, right? All these characters had significant seasons of time, years and years and years, where they were waiting on God's promises to be revealed in their lives, where God had said, this is going to happen, and now I need you to wait. And, everything that was to come to them, they had to wait. And sometimes they had to exchange what it was that they wanted instead for what they needed. And I think that's a tough thing about waiting sometimes, is that there's this interesting balance. Would I rather get what I want now or what God wants to give me later? And I think that's one of the questions. And I can rest assured and promise you that if you're waiting right now, that means God's working on something he wants to give you. But sometimes it's more like a pot roast than it is a microwave meal. It's got to cook in the crock pot for a while, and that makes it all the sweeter. And so by asking yourself, is this a want or a need that you have? In this case, community, you mentioned a tribe, is a human need. It's a human need. But also within that, one of the things Jenny and I in my life, I've surrounded myself with military and first responders now for years, and I am not one. And so it's very often that I'm in a room full of people in uniform and I'm the only civilian in the room. So I would say I don't belong. I'm not a part of that tribe. But instead of asking where do I fit in, I started asking where am I needed? And that question started to help me find my purpose again. And with a person like you with so many talents, I guarantee you're needed in more places than maybe you'll fit in. And that's okay. That's okay. I think start there. The other thing is I would just say that you're not alone. There's a lot of people who have been down this journey. So it might be good to even find a couple other people in your circle who have went through seasons of waiting and ask them, what were some coping strategies that worked for you? What were some ways that you remained faithful, patient, while still waiting? And those are a little trite, and I get that, but I do think that'll hopefully help you and encourage you a little bit, because good things are coming. You may not be able to see them yet, but they're just around the corner and they're coming soon, and I can promise that. So that's exciting. What's next?
Hold on, we need to fix this. I'll edit that out, but we need this. Just did a thing.
Was that an okay answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was good. All right, so I'm gonna just start and I'll edit me in. Okay. Here's another good one. They say, I'm a pastor at a church, and I'm concerned that our church isn't responding to people who have endured trauma or mental health challenges well enough. Where should we start? That's a good question.
My goodness. I wish every church leader would email and ask us this. I travel around to a lot of churches, and sadly, this is not a question many of them want to answer. They would rather just sort of refer to outside sources than try to deal with it. And not only is this going to be an important answer for your congregants or your members, but also just for the community and the world that you serve, right? We live in a world where, there's such a 1 in 4 women, is diagnosed with a mental health condition. We have a huge number, 1 in 12 boys, I think, is sexually abused. 1 in 6 girls is sexually abused. Right? I mean, there's these data points that are just shocking. And so your church, the fact that you're asking this shows me already that you might be in a great position to help. The first thing I would say is just that you don't have to be something that you're not. You have a superpower, which is you have the ability to love people, to call them to a higher standard, and to remind them who they are in Christ. And that's a unique ability that you have that none of the clinical world has. Number 2, I would say, is look for ways, trainings, etc., to equip lay leaders in your church, your prayer team members, your small group leaders, your elders, your deacons, your board, whatever it is, the structure of your church. That's going to be worth your time, because you can't possibly let's assume that you become a lighthouse for people who are dealing with mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical traumas. You can't possibly handle all that volume of people. And so you're going to need to train up that second tier, and you're going to need to make room, even in your service. Try to make room for celebrating progress of people. We have a tendency to sort of only celebrate destinations, but the journey is worth celebrating. And people who are dealing with chronic illness or mental health struggles or trauma, it's not like this HGTV jump one to another, right? It's a slow building process. And so invite people who are actually in their journey some stage to say, here's where I'm at. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm also not where I was. And let people spotlight that. And that'll actually create a safe environment within your church for people to celebrate progress rather than perfection. And as you do that, start to pray that God will send you people who have endured that kind of trauma. Shameless plug, we also have built a new product called Overcome Academy, and we'd love for your church to be able to use that. If you want more on that, you can just email us at show@rebootrecovery.com, and I'll send you the full information on that, and we can get you guys hooked up, and that's going to train your small group leaders and prayer team exactly how to handle people who are in crisis or people who have dealt with problems like this. And again, I hope everybody listening will take a cue from this question and say to themselves, what can I do? I don't feel like I'm doing enough. What can I do? And that's part of us being a community, a movement of people all over, overcoming trauma together, and that's what it's all about. So I think that's all the time we have for questions. We usually only have time for 2 or 3 on an episode. So, we're going to come back after this short break. We're going to be discussing what we've been talking about today, which is this idea of if we're going to teach people to not be offensive, do we also need to teach them how not to be offended? We're going to take some thoughts from us on this, and then we're going to ask you for some of your thoughts as well when we come back.
This episode of the Reboot Recovery Show is sponsored by our listeners. That's right, with great listeners just like you help make our show possible. So to give and be a part of the team, go to rebootrecovery.com and help us reach even more people. Advice from the Reboot Recovery Show is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for the specialized training and professional judgment of a healthcare or mental health care professional. Reboot Recovery cannot be held responsible for the use of the information provided. Please always consult a trained mental health professional before making any decision regarding treatment of yourself or others.
Welcome back to the Reboot Recovery Show. Lori, it is hard to believe. This is already like our 6th episode of our first season. So if you've listened to every single one, you get an imaginary cookie. Just take a big bite of that imaginary cookie. It's delicious, right? But no, in seriousness, we are extremely blown away by the listeners. We've already had, so many people download the episodes and share them with people and post on Facebook and submit things to us. And we just wanted to say thank you for that. You guys and women are truly amazing. And so thank you for that. If you haven't left a review yet as well, please do that, because people are actually looking to that to see if they're going to listen in, or if they're just going to listen to the sports radio or whatever it may be. So today we're discussing this article by Irshad Manji. Her book, Don't Label Me, An Incredible Conversation for Divided Times, says that if we're teaching society how not to be offensive, it's necessary we teach society how not to be offended. How not to be offended. So being offended is not a particularly challenging thing to develop. Right? Getting offended is actually relatively easy. Matter of fact, I don't have to teach my boys how to be offended.
Right.
They just sort of naturally learned that skill, right? But I do have to teach my boys how to hear someone say something offensive and not be offended, to not want to retaliate. And bluntly, as a Christian person, part of my mission on this earth is to share my faith with people who have different worldviews, different opinions, different perspectives than myself, and different also than the teachings of what I believe and who I follow. But if I'm so busy getting offended by them, how can I possibly be developing a relationship with them that allows me to be able to get to know them and them to get to know me, to let them see Christ's love in my heart? How could I, if I'm so busy getting offended, you can't be offended by someone and developing a relationship with them very easily at the same time. And this is something that Manji actually, I think, would agree with me on. I can't speak for her, but, she argues that when we allow ourselves to take offense, we miss out on the opportunities to grow these relationships, these mutually beneficial relationships. Now, granted, people do say some stupid, dumb, idiotic, other words there, things, right? They do. I'll give you that. But guess who people are in that statement? When I say people say some stupid thing, guess who people are? People.
Us.
Yeah, you people, us people,
Yeah.
right? We are those people. And as people who have endured trauma, we're going to say some mean and hurtful things, but we're also going to hear some mean and hurtful things. Sometimes they'll even be downright offensive and, need I say, maybe even damaging to our ongoing progress if we let them offend us. The rest of the world, it might be able to use the emotional and the mental and the physical energy it takes to get offended all the time. But for those of us healing from trauma, let's be honest, we don't have the energy to give. Anything that steals our energy away from the healing process is robbing us and slowing us down of reaching the destination that we want to. I mean, let me ask you this question. Name something that you were offended by last month. Name something you were offended by last month. Or how about last week? What about 2 days ago? What about yesterday morning on Facebook? People get offended so easily, we can't even remember what we're offended about.
Right.
And it's funny, most of our offenses are pointless because if we can't remember what we were offended about, then obviously nothing changed in the scenario. Nothing got better. And so we might think, well, because nothing seemed to change in the situation, well, then really the whole experience was a wash, right? I mean, nothing was gained, but nothing was lost. So yeah, I got offended, but I let it go and we move forward. I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to say, what if that's actually not true? I contend that actually something was and is lost. Not only does it push us further away from others, I believe that all of those offenses actually begin to add up. That while our minds and memories don't carry around all of those offenses, I believe that our hearts, in fact, do. And actually, not just that our hearts do, but we actually then, we become offended as a habit, that we actually learn, we practice getting offended. We get better at getting offended, and pretty soon we develop a lifestyle of offendedness, of being offended. Think about it like this. Think about it like a pebble. We go along and something offends us, and I pick up this little pebble, I put it in my pocket. I start carrying it around with me. Now, it's so little that I barely notice that I've picked up that pebble, right? It's such a little thing. I carry it around. Instantaneously, my body is adjusted to the added, ounce that it adds to my weight. No big deal. A few days later, another offense. Pick up another pebble. Then another. And we don't realize it, but over time, slowly, all these pebbles are starting to add up to a lot of weight. If you've ever gained weight, slowly, it never feels like you're gaining a ton of weight until one day you put your pants on. You're like, man, these don't tighten. I can't button these anymore. It's the same thing, that over time you start to gain this weight, this heaviness, this habit of being offended. And actually, neuroscience actually teaches us that our brains are drawn towards patterns. They're drawn towards things that we train it to look familiar. So not only do we get offended by the thing that we pick up, but now our brains start to constantly scan for anything that looks a little bit like the thing that just offended us. So we start getting offended by a larger quantity of things than we did initially. And pretty soon, that's why we end up in a cage, because everywhere we go, everybody is offensive. Everybody is doing it wrong. And pretty soon we wonder why no one wants to be around us. As a Christian, I believe God was way ahead of us in this. Just listen to a few of these things. Whether you're a Christian person or not, hopefully you can get something out of this lesson here. It says, you've been to any wedding, you've heard this one. 1 Corinthians 13, right? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not, it doesn't dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. Now listen to this. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth, right? Again, so it's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs, right? So he's way ahead of us. It was so important, this idea of not picking up offendedness, that even Jesus, he's talking about when you're going to take communion in Matthew chapter 5, verses 23, he says, therefore, if you're at an offering you're about to offer your gift at the altar, and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, he says, leave your gift there. Go and reconcile with that person, then come back and do your little offering. How many people do we have who are attending church every Sunday that God would say, stop worshiping, stop singing, stop getting money in the plate, stop taking communion. Go and reconcile with your brother or sister first, then come back and worry about me. Right? It's that important, right? I want you to hear this really clear. Getting offended doesn't make them better. It makes you worse. Getting offended doesn't make them better. It makes you and I worse. Can we agree that maybe while we're learning how to be less offensive, maybe we should focus also on learning how to become less offended? I could talk about this obviously for more than another hour, but our time is over again today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. I'm Evan Owens. I hope you found it encouraging and challenging. And until next time, keep moving forward as we overcome trauma together. Have a good one.